When we talk about forensic odontology, we can talk about three different areas. We talk about identification, we talk about bite marks, and we talk about age estimation. In this specific talk, I will mainly put my emphasis on identification, although I will go a little bit with an example on age estimation. Although this is from 2015, it is pretty much the situation in Israel. Even today, I checked my data for 2019, and it's pretty much the same. When we have what we have here is the total of cases in the year 2015, and as you can see, the cases that arrived at the Institute of Forensic Medicine, 20% of them required some extra action for identification, for positive identification of the cadaver. About 80% of the cases will come identified or will be visually identified by relatives within a very short period of time of the arrival of the cadaver. And what you have here is that from those 1,500 some odd cases, we have about 315 cases that required special identification. And if we look at the dental identification, it's about 10% of the cases, give or take. Now, this is the case mostly alongside the last few years. I added here orange is the odontology. And you can see that pretty much it doesn't fluctuate greatly from year to year. Most of the cases are the positive identifications are performed by fingerprints, and radiology has been falling down as DNA has been rising. For the year 2000, because of the coronavirus, we tried not to go into the Institute of Forensic Medicine, and most of the identifications were performed, the dental identifications were performed by sending the radiographs to the odontologist, and they would do it at home and send an answer. So as you can see, yes, in the year 2000, odontology went down as far as the number of cases, but as I'm being told by the people that still work there, it's going up again. Why do we give emphasis to forensic odontology? We consider the oral cavity more or less like the black box that you have in an airplane, which is red, but it will save most of the data. When the cadaver is almost destroyed, the dental information will remain there. The reason for that is because the oral cavity is well protected by the tongue, by the muscles that surround the cheeks and the lips, and it is a relatively wet environment. And within that, we have a relatively large number of teeth. We have 32 in the adult, 20 in children, and each tooth has 5 surfaces in which dental procedures can be performed. This gives us a great number of combinations of the combinations of data of the dentition, which can be used for comparison. Thus, we can say that because we have this great amount of data, it makes each mouth more or less unique. A little bit about dental morphology, and again, I apologize, most of you must know this, but some of the reasons that the dental information is so good for identification is because of the materials that are used for restorations, and the materials of the teeth themselves are very, very strong. In fact, when we're talking about teeth, we're talking about the crown and the root. And if we're looking from inside out, we have the pulp chamber, which goes down into the root canal. Then it's covered by a layer of dentin, which is not very hard, not very soft, somewhere in between. And then this is it's covered in the crown by the enamel. The enamel is the hardest material that we have in our body, and it's very resistant to high temperatures and to physical impact. So that's one of the reasons that we have such a good results when we're doing dental identification. If we're looking at the mouth, let's imagine that this cross here, the vertical line, let's call it the nose. And with each one of our teeth in the crown, the area that is facing the nose, it's called mesial. And the part that is going away from the nose towards the ear, if you wish, we will call it distal. Then we have one surface in each tooth that will be looking inside into the palate or the tongue, so we will call it either palatinal or lingual, and one surface that will be looking outwards towards the face, we'll call it facial, or towards the lips, so we call it buccal. The surface that of each tooth that contact each other, the upper teeth that when it's facing the lower teeth, it's called the occlusal, which is this surface. We'll see it better in a little while. We have basically two types of dentition. We have a deciduous dentition, a primary, and we have a permanent or secondary dentition, and let me show you how it looks. Within the deciduous dentition, we have only 20 teeth. This is the primary dentition that will be shed and will be changed by the permanent dentition. Within the primary dentition, we have on each quarter of mouth, we have two incisors, one central, one lateral. These are the uppers, and you can see they are wider than the lowers. The lowers are thinner. Then we have one canine. We don't have premolars. We have two molars. Okay, we have upper molars and lower molars. The main characteristic of the primary teeth is that they are very small. Their enamel is very thick, and that's why they are more globular, more rounded. When we look at the permanent dentition, we have incisors, we have the centrals and the laterals, which are, again, wider than the lower incisors. We have the canines. We have premolars that are the permanent teeth that will change the primary molars. We have two in the upper, in the maxilla, two in the mandibula, and then we have three molars. So the permanent dental formula will be two incisors, one canine, two premolars, and three molars. Now, the final part of this very brief introduction into odontology will be the dental nomenclature. And I want to put a little bit of emphasis in this because it's one of the main problems within forensic odontology. In diverse parts of the world, they tend to number the teeth in a different way. What we want to do is to be able to communicate within each other. Instead of saying upper central incisor, I want to give you a number, and you have to be able to say, okay, I'm looking at this number, this is what is happening. That would be easy if everybody used the same nomenclature, but that doesn't happen. The most common one, the one that is used almost all over the world, is the one created by the Federación Dental Internacional, the Dental Federation, the International Dental Federation, which is very simple. They have divided the mouth into 4 quarters. The right is number 1, the upper right is number 1, the upper left is number 2, lower left is number 3, lower right is number 4. Within each one of these quarters, we have 8 teeth. Teeth number 1 would be in the upper right quarter would be 11. On the left one, it will be 21 or 21 or 22 or 21, etc. When we go to the lower part of the mouth, of the mandibula, we will see that we have quarter number 3, tooth number 1 within it, so we have tooth number 31. This is very easy. It's very commonly used for the deciduous dentition, for the primary dentition. Instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, we go 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the same thing, 5 teeth within each quarter. The problem is that not everybody uses this system. For instance, in the United States, they utilize something called the universal system. Although it's called universal, only the United States uses it. And what they have done is they go from the right, upper right, that will be tooth number 1, then number 2, etc., until they reach the upper right central incisor is number 8, and then we move on 9, 10, and 16. Again, we move downwards to the mandible, 17, 18, etc., until we reach 32 teeth. And then they do for the primary dentition A, B, C, D until T. Okay, it's not very complicated, but it's very different from the way it is done in the FDI system. Then we have something called the Polymer System or the Zsigmondy system, which is used all over the world by most clinicians. So I cannot say that one country uses it more than others, but most clinicians, mostly from my generation, use this system. What they have here is the same idea of these little quarters that we talked about them before, and they just draw the quarter. This is the upper left, this is the upper right, this is the lower left, this is the lower right, and within this quarter, they will write the number of the tooth, 1, 2, 3. So the number that is sitting above the line indicates that it's maxillary. If the number is sitting below the line, it indicates it's mandibular, and the number sitting to the let's say the line sitting to the left of the number indicates it's left, and the line sitting to the right of the number indicates it's right. Also, it's very visual, it's very easy to understand. And then we have the Scandinavian countries. Just to give you one last example, there are more systems, but the Haderup system, which also utilizes numbering 1 to 8 in each quarter, but then to indicate it is the maxilla, they'll write a plus system, a plus sign, and to indicate it's mandibular, they'll write a minus sign. And then to indicate if it's the right or the left, it depends if the plus or the minus is located to the right or to the left of the number. It's a little bit more complicated, but the Scandinavians like this system. Why do I go into this paka about the nomenclature? Because look what happens if we don't know in which system we are talking about. Let's say I am in a mass disaster situation, I'm collecting data, and I have contacted an odontologist in the United States. Now I'm telling him on tooth number 23, I have caries on the mesial side, and when he's talking about the 23, he's not talking about the same tooth, okay? For this canine, I am saying 23, but in universal, it would be 11. So we have to be able in our communication to make sure that we know which kind of numbering we are using to be able to say that we're talking about the same tooth. Just a little bit of history, not even 1 second. Oscar Amadeo is considered the father of forensic odontology. He wrote his dissertation in 1898 about the importance of odontological data within the medical legal system, and many of the things he claimed in the 19th century we are facing still today. For instance, the issue of the nomenclature. Let's move on now to identification of victims using dental protocols. I will not talk about the body retrieval. This would be a very long talk. about the methodology, how the bodies have to be collected, how they have to be numbered, how they have to be transported, etc. I will not talk about that. I will put emphasis on the collection of postmortem data, the collection of antemortem data, and the comparison between the two, which we call reconciliation. That will give us either a positive or a negative identification, or at the end of our exam, we might say, I don't know, I don't have enough data. So let's talk a little bit about postmortem data collection. When we are retrieving the dental information from a cadaver, we have to do a visual examination. It is usually done by two persons. One person examines, another person writes down, and then they interchange. So we look at each mouth at least twice, and then we take radiographs, and I will talk a little bit more about that. What is the information that we're trying to collect from the cadaver? First of all, we want to know which type of dentition it is. Is it a primary tooth or is it a permanent tooth? Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that each tooth is in its proper position. Maybe it's rotated, maybe it's not within the same line with the rest of the teeth. We want to say if we see it present, if it's erupting or if it has erupted, or maybe it is retained within the bone. If we have missing tooth, we want to know if it's missing congenitally, so there is no space between the missing teeth, or if there is a space, which indicates that there was a tooth there, but now it's missing. Was it missing antemortem? It was extracted, and then the person died a few years later, or if it happened very recently while the person found it's dead, or even post-mortem while the body was being transported. Skeletons tend to fall easily. We have a lot of data to collect from teeth, but not only the restorations. The denture can give us information regarding the cultural and the biological aspects of this individual. For instance, in a mouth that we have a lot of caries, a lot of missing teeth, we can say a little bit about the socio-economical status of this individual. There are some cultural characteristics of certain people. For instance, when we were working on the tsunami in Thailand in 2004, where we had circa 2,000 Thai individuals, and we had about 3,000 from different countries. It was very important for us to be able to say if we're talking about a local person, then the data will be more readily available than if we're talking about somebody that it was on vacation, and we will have to make a lot of effort to obtain this data. And I can tell you from the tsunami that we identified about 3,000 individuals from dental information. It was one of the main methods of identification during this disaster. And maybe some of you participated in this endeavor. We learned a lot during the identification of these victims, and basically most of the people that worked in the tsunami in identification said that our professional career is divided in before the tsunami and after the tsunami, and the systems we use, the methodology we use, was very much changed by what we learned from the identification of victims during the tsunami in Thailand. What else are we looking? We're looking into morphology and pathology of the teeth before we're looking into restorations. For instance, these are the incisors that you remember from a few pictures before. Some populations, some biological populations, have what we call shovel-shaped incisors. As you can see, this is the palatinal side. We're looking from the inside, and you can see that the shape of the incisor has a little rim around it. When that rim doesn't exist, in other populations, Caucasoid populations, Negroid populations don't have this rim. We are going to look at characteristics in the roots. For instance, we have here an enamel pearl in between the roots that will be visible on a radiograph. We have here probably some trauma that happened a long time before the person died, and we have what we call a delaceration, so the shape of the root is different. The root should be straight underneath the crown. So we're going to look at all this morphology and write it down. It might help us for the identification. We remember I gave you a formula that we have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, 3 molars. Sometimes we have more than that. Here you have an extra incisor in between the 2 central incisors. Here, if you look at the radiograph, you can see this is 1 molar. This is the space for another molar. Somebody's trying to ask a question? Okay, never mind.
I think that was accidental. Somebody unmuted their mic.
Okay, so we have 1 molar, we have another molar, we have a third one, and you remember from the formula that should be the end of it, but here we have a 4th molar. So extranumerary teeth, which are very uncommon, might be helpful in the identification. Of course, we will write down if there is caries and in which tooth and in which surface of the tooth it is. We will write down if we have defects on the enamel, which are called hypoplasia. These defects are usually the result of defects from malnutrition or from incidents during growth and development that will leave a mark on the enamel of the tooth. And the main thing we will look at is restorations and fillings. Now, what we look at is the restoration itself, in which tooth it is and in which surfaces we find it. Now, we have different types of restorations which can give us different types of problems. When they are metal, like gold or various amalgams, they're very easy to see visually and they're very easy to see in the radiographs. But when we have composites, sometimes we can miss them, but we might see them in the radiograph. It is customary to insert within the composite some kind of radiopack material to make sure that we can see it in the radiograph. The porcelains are very difficult to see. The porcelain itself here, you see nothing. What you see is only the part that is holding this porcelain onto the tooth. So we have to write down the location, we have to write down the location within the dentition and within the tooth, and to remember that we can have a restoration and it can be changed afterwards. So although they're very important, we have to know how they are changed and in which direction these changes will occur, and I will show you more about that later. Now we have restorations that are prosthesis, which means we had a tooth, the tooth is not there anymore, and we're going to put something instead of that. Or we have a tooth, the decay is so major that we will have to take off most of it and we'll leave just a little bit of it and put some kind of capping on top of it. So these are fixed restorations that we put it on the tooth and it stays there until it falls or it's changed by something else. We have bridges. For instance, you have here, you can see the roots down here and the crown. It's metallic, and on top of that there is some ceramic. And here there is no tooth, and we have put just a unit made of metal and ceramic on top of it. And if we're not careful, we might miss it. On decomposed bodies and on skeletons, it's very easy to see because we don't have the soft tissue covering the junction between the crown and the post that is holding it. In the fresh cadaver, usually what we will see is just a little rim of metal because the gums tend to recede with time. If they have not receded, it's very easy to miss them. And then we have the removable prostheses that can be complete or partial. This means partial means that there are some teeth in the mouth, and this person just puts on and off the prosthesis with some hooks. There are different kinds of forms of attachment to the teeth that remain. The important thing about these removable prostheses is that many times the technician that is making the prosthesis will mark it down with a reference number or with some kind of marking with his name or the name of the patient. And this is very, very usable for identification later on. Finally, although there's a lot of information that we can collect from the cadaver, but I cannot give you everything in 1 hour, we will talk a little bit about implants, because implants changed a little bit the way we looked at the mouth. Basically, what we have is that a tooth has been lost, and we've waited until we have some bone in there, or sometimes we don't have to wait, and we put in a metallic post that on top of it we will attach metal ceramic crown, usually metal ceramic, yes? So you can see these are fixed prostheses, and these are implants in which we don't have a tooth. So the question is, should we write it ante-mortem or should we write the implant itself? A little bit of debate over that, but basically we have decided to leave it as implant and make sure that even if they're lost afterwards, we know in which direction the changes can happen. So we can have a restoration, which will eventually become a crown, which will eventually become an implant. But we cannot have it the other way around. If we have an implant, we will never have afterwards restoration in that area. And as I said, we collect all this information, we write it down, and then we do X-rays. To do X-rays on a cadaver, usually we use portable X-ray machines. This one was developed during the tsunami. Today there are many types that are very convenient to use, and after we take the radiographs, we add the information that has come from the radiographs. For instance, we can have an endodontic treatment. We might have a capping of the tip of the root. It's called an apicectomy. So all this radiographic information has to be added into the postmortem data collection. It's very important to remember when we're taking radiographs that the angle in which we take the radiograph might change the way we see things. And this is the same individual. And you can see, because of a change in the angle in which the radiograph was taken, these two amalgams that are part of what I told you before, an apicectomy is closing the tip of the root. Here it appears almost like one, or very close by. And here, because of the angle of the radiographs, they appear like two very separate ones. And we could make the mistake of assuming that this is not the same individual because this has two and this one has only one. Now, the conditions in which the data is collected might affect the way we're going to do it. I'll give you a couple of examples. We had a terrible earthquake in Christchurch in 2011, and we had 170 victims to identify. Because it was in New Zealand and it took us a long time to arrive there, and the people in New Zealand are very calm, very collected, they don't rush anything, we were able to work in a very well-devised mortuary with the stations, with all the equipment necessary, with good light, with peace and quiet. The loudest ones, of course, were the Israelis. And we were working here about 150 persons, very, very comfortably, very conveniently. In that kind of conditions, you can do an oral autopsy. Actually, you can lift all the soft tissue and examine the mouth in your hand, and you will not miss any data. You can take photographs, you can take radiographs, and all the information is collected. I always thought that the New Zealand was the best conditions I have ever worked, and then some 10 years ago, the Institute of Forensic Medicine acquired a CT machine, and now we do a virtual autopsies, and the dental data can be collected from the CT information itself. We can see the mouth, the teeth themselves. This is low quality. We have now much better quality. You can see it in X-ray form, and you can see the restorations. This is a radiograph of the person when he was alive, an ante-mortem radiograph, and we can create a very similar radiograph from the CT scan and do the comparison between the two. This is the postmortem. You can see very easy to make the comparison. Almost all the data is there. This part has to be taken in a separate view, but basically nowadays we can make a complete orthopantogram using a CT scanner. Let me give you an example of how much this CT scanner is very, very usable even for dental identification. We had a situation some 6 years ago when there was a collapse of parking lot. 5 floors of the parking lot collapsed one on top of each other, and it took about a week to find all the cadavers. This is the last body that was collected from the disaster. And as you can see, it's also decomposed, and because so many cars and it rotated in itself, you can see here are his feet. This is one arm, this is the other arm, and the head is to be found. We really didn't know how to even start looking for the teeth. And then simply we took the CT and we found in which area of the body the teeth are, and then we did we could reach them out and do the dental identification. Now a little bit about ante-mortem data collection. One of the most famous cases from the 19th century is the fire in the Charity Bazaar, which there were 126 victims, and many of them were identified by dental data. The most famous one, of course, was the Duchess of d'Alençon, and forgive me for the accent. That was the sister of the Austrian Empress Tzipi. She was identified by the dental records that were sent to Paris. Where do we get this data? We can ask the family members to give us the information in which dental clinic the individual that is missing was having his teeth treated, and we will talk with the dentists and we will get all the information from them. We can also approach the insurance companies and get from them, usually if a person has an dental insurance, the odontologist will do will create the program of what are the restorations or the changes that he or she is going to make in the mouth, and send it to the insurance company for approval. So we don't necessarily have what was done, but we have the program that was approved. So it's not complete, but it's pretty good information. And also we have databases from military cases, for instance. We have some schools that take radiographs of the children every few years. Those types of databases which are available for comparison. Sometimes the data comes very well written and very easy to understand. Sometimes not so good. You can see here a dentist that wrote all the treatment he did on all the members of one family in one chart. The red is one member of the family, the blue is another member of the family. Okay, this is impossible to read, but usually we have pretty good information. In databases from the military, I don't know how they do it in other countries, but in the Israel Defense Forces, they take a DNA sample, they take fingerprints, they take orthopantogram, and they take photographs. It's very important to remember that these photographs are taken with a mirror. So what we usually know that the right of the patient is on our left, when we're looking at the photographs, the right of the patient is in our right because we take a photograph from the mirror. And it's very important to remember that when you're looking at photographs from dentitions, make sure to ask, is this taken directly or with a mirror? So we have taken postmortem data, we have taken antemortem data, and now we want to compare it. We want to do a reconciliation between these two sets of data. If we have a very small disaster, we can even do it manually. You put all your antemortem data on one side, or your postmortem data on the other side, and you sit with the odontologist, you compare what we have, and you can make an identification. But things are not so easy. Usually they are much more complicated. Before I go into large databases, let me just jump a little bit back. If you remember, I told you that forensic odontology also deals in age estimation. And I want to give you an example when age estimation is very important also in identification. This is a motor vehicular accident. A number of cars crashed into each other and were burned. In one of the cars was a whole family, mother, father, and their 6 children, 2 of them identical twins, 2 of them very close in their age. Burnt bodies, I'm not going to show you horrible pictures, but we had a problem because usually when I'm teaching forensic radiology or forensic odontology, there is always a student that would say, why don't you do DNA and get rid of this whole problem? You know, DNA is supposed to solve all the problems in identification. What we have here is we could take the DNA from the mother, DNA from the father, but at the end we will have the answer that we will get from the DNA of the children is that all these children are the sons and daughters of these parents. We will not be able to identify them each one by itself. So what we did is we did an age estimation. We knew the age of each one of the children, and we did the radiographs and with the CT scanner. And I'm giving you just one example of the 6 children. We have atlases that will tell us this will be the teeth that have erupted or that are being formed within the mouth of a 7-year-old child, and we do the comparison and we see these are the deciduous teeth. This is the first permanent molar that is out, and we have the bud of the second permanent molar within, and we have the buds of the canine and the premolars, and we do the comparison, and we can determine that this is one of this child is more or less 7 years old. But then we have a terrible problem because we have 2 identical twins, the same age, and as you can see from the photos, they were really very, very similar. And we asked the grandparents to send us photographs of the children smiling. We enlarged the photos were not very good quality. Nevertheless, if you look at the central incisors, then we are looking here at the left lateral incisor of one twin, and we're looking at the left lateral incisor of another twin, and what you can see is that one twin has a very large lateral incisor and the other one has one that is much smaller. Then we move onwards to the canine. The canine is tiny, while the canine on this other individual is regular size. So we check with the cadavers, and we see we have here one of the victims has one large central incisor with a very small lateral incisor, one large central incisor with one normal sized lateral incisor, with a normal sized canine and a tiny little canine. We did the radiographs, and what we found is that in one of the twins, the permanent canine has not erupted, and he retained the deciduous canine. And that was the way that we could distinguish between these two individuals to be able to give them each one his own burial. Now going back to the comparison. There are many automatic systems for identification. These systems usually are fingerprinting systems for identification and dental identification. The one, I'm not going to say it's the most common, but it's the one that is being used by the Interpol and the Israel police, and that's the one I know the best, is Plus Data. There is one very commonly used in the United States, which is WinID. There is one from Australia called That ID, which apparently is excellent. I have not I have not used it, but what I will talk, it's just an example, and Oscar will show you later on the system that we have devised. Let me show you a little bit about Plus Data. Plus Data, I learned how to use it during the tsunami in Thailand in 2004, but I'll give you an example from the earthquake in Christchurch in New Zealand from 10/11. As I said, you remember we had an excellent mortuary. We also had an excellent, very convenient center of identification in which the experts will work at each one of the stations, putting the data into the system for later comparison. Most systems, of course, Plus Data among them, use two sets of forms: yellow forms for ante-mortem data collection and pink forms for post-mortem data collections. Now, every form is a little bit different. Some forms are longer, are more cumbersome. Plus Data is quite long, but it's useful. The first thing that the first advantage that gives you this system is that you can do data mining, which means I have some piece of information, I can search all the bodies and all the missing persons and try to find one piece of information within the two sets of data. For instance, this is a case in which the family of this individual related to the Interpol. What are the most commonly things that this person the personal effects that he used to have with him? He had his iPhone, he used to smoke Bensons and Hedges, and he used to carry a multi-tool, the type Leatherman. Okay, we thought, you know what, this Leatherman might be something that it's worth looking for. So we asked the system for search all over the records for the word Leatherman, and let's see if we can find it. And the system retrieves two cases, one ante-mortem, which is the one I showed you, and one post-mortem, which has a Leatherman within the personal effects of the individual. Okay, we're doing good. The sex is the same. And let's see which data do we have for this individual. We don't have dental data. We have a photograph. We don't have fingerprints. But we have a very good photograph. Usually when we're asking family members to give us photographs for identification, it's very sad, but we say, please give us a photograph of the person smiling as widely as possible. This is a photograph of this gentleman at the wedding of his son. We enlarge the photograph, and we can see quite a bit of dental information. We do the same for the photograph of the cadaver, and look how much data we have. When we were looking at the body, we thought this was a post-mortem fracture, but actually it's antemortem, and you can see it in here. Then we see that he has a composite on the lateral incisor in mesial, and we see here a composite on the lateral incisor on mesial. We see that he has a composite on mesial of the lateral incisor. We see the composite on. Then we look at the alignment of the teeth in the mandibula of the visible teeth, and you can see that there is some kind of very old fracture diagonal in this central incisor, and you can see it here. You can see that the lateral incisor has kind of a U shape, and it's here. And with all this data, you go into the identifying team, and you tell them all you have, and they decide if this is enough for identification. In this case, they decided yes, this is enough for identification, and we can bury the body. But what do we do when we do have dental data? We put the data in the computer. We took it at the mortuary in forms. We sit in the computer. We insert it in, and we have the radiographs. We put them in as well. And how do we take this data? We have codes. Now, these codes are specific for plus data. Each system has different codes. For instance, the code for an amalgam filling, we take the first two letters of amalgam, the first letter of filling, and the code for amalgam filling is AMF. If the code is something with three words like metal, ceramic, crown, we take the first letter of each one of the words, and it's MCC. If we have only one word, we take the first three letters of the word, but because this is something that will be seen on radiograph, we take only the first two, AP and X for radiograph. It takes exactly 10 minutes to learn the codes, no big deal. You put in the codes and you ask the system, and it gives you an identification. This is when the conditions are excellent for working. Let me take you now to Haiti 2010. An incredible amount of disease. The whole country is basically destroyed. Traveling conditions were excellent. Living conditions, not so hot. The mission was not so much for identification, it was to put a mobile hospital in Port-au-Prince. So the IDF put the hospital in a football field, and they allowed us to decide, because we're not IDF, we're police, without tents, without bathrooms, you can put your beds in there, and we slept on cots. It's very convenient when you have secondary tremors and your fall from the cot is not a very long fall. Anyway, as you can see, conditions were terrible. The rest of the teams, only the Israeli team moved away from the airport. The rest of the teams made a big camp of tents in the airport, and they were waiting for to find better places to start working. The Dutch team of a rescue team approached us and asked us if we could help them in the identification of four Dutch individuals that have gone to Haiti to adopt children. They were having a few restful days before they fly back to Holland, and they died. All of them died in the earthquake. They located the bodies, they took out the bodies, but we had no mortuary to work on. So basically, you work on the floor where you can, and the conditions are not excellent. The bodies were not in very good shape. As you can see, they were already being decomposed. Nevertheless, even if the conditions are not very good, you try to take as much information as you can, including radiographs and photographs. And here, the photographs were very, very important. Then we went to the camp in the airport to get the antemortem data from these individuals, and as I told you, our conditions were not excellent. And you can see here from Dr. Iver's face how happy she was to find portable loos. We didn't have those. They had data from transferred via internet to their camp. We got the antemortem data, we had our postmortem data, and we tried to do the comparison. Here you have individual number 4. Everything seems to be very good. This is the antemortem. This is the lower part is the postmortem. The feelings all look the same. Everything is honky dory. And then Dr. Ebert almost has a heart attack. She says, in the antemortem, he has a feeling that he doesn't have in the postmortem. Oh boy. So we're thinking now, okay, we have to go back to the body and check what happened. But then, because we took good photographs, you can see on the photograph there is a composite restoration that is not radiopaque, but that's why we couldn't see it. We missed it while we were doing the postmortem data collection because the conditions were not excellent. As I said, it didn't show on the radiograph, but it shows on the photograph. So it is very important to take all the data that you can because it might save the identification. Let me give you another example of various conditions of work. We had in 2012 a terrorist attack in Burgas airport in Bulgaria. Once again, the main objective of the mission was to evacuate the wounded, so traveling conditions, not so hot. But the important thing was to evacuate the wounded, and as we arrived, they dropped the DVI team and with ambulances put everybody, all the wounded on the Hercules and sent them to Israel, and we remained in Burgas trying to do the identification of the mortal victims. They had a small mortuary. I'm not going to say that those were bad conditions. We had everything we needed, small but efficient. We took fingerprints from the bodies. Because we were trying to evacuate victims, so we had to leave Israel without the antemortem data, but we took the fingerprints electronically and create fingerprints form. And we here you have the expert from the Israel police. She is a fingerprint comparisons expert, and here is the head of the identification unit of the military of the Israel Defense Forces. And what they're doing is they're sending this data that we had, the fingerprints that were collected in the morgue, they're sending them electronically to their databases in Israel, and they will get a reply, and Yael will ratify the identification, yes or no. We also took dental information. As you can see, again, one person checks, one person writes, and then we change, and then we take radiographs. And here you have one example. This is these are the radiographs taken at the morgue in Bulgaria. This is the dental status of the patient sent to us from Israel. Photographs. They took the photographs from the dentist in Israel and sent them to us. And here we have the comparison. And if you remember at the beginning when I was telling you what are we looking for, you could say, well, there are many differences here. You have here in the antemortem, you have a big restoration and there are no root canals. And in the postmortem, we have a crown with a post with the root canal. That is okay. We have no problem with that. If it was the other way around, when in the antemortem you have a crown, a post, and the root canal in the antemortem, and in the antemortem you don't, in the postmortem you don't have them, then you have a problem. Another example here, you have a tooth with serious caries. The dentist heroically saved the root, put a post, and a crown. So even though there are differences, we are able to do the identification because we know what are the possible changes and what are impossible. Here, another example, you have a slightly large restoration here that has been changed by a crown and a post. And if you remember, I told you we want to check also the positioning of the tooth, the morphology of the tooth. We have this canine that is rotated on itself. The lingual part is looking mesial and lingual part is looking mesially. This is a perfectly good identification. The bodies were repatriated 2 days later. I want to finish with the importance of identification, not only dental, but in general. This is a very old ruling from 1991, but it has been for 25 years, it has been my motto when working in identifying victims. It was a ruling from the Supreme Court of Israel, and it says that the dignity of a person doesn't end when the person dies. People have to be buried with dignity in by themselves, not in commingled with other bodies. And also the identification preserves the dignity of the people that love this person that has died in the disaster. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Tzipi. I'm just going to talk for 10 minutes or so, just to show you just briefly what we are doing in Panacea, specifically with Tzipi, for the last year. Well, after many years in the academic world, we founded Panacea 4 years ago, and since then we are working in skeleton AD software. We released it this year. Well, and skeleton AD is intended to be an integral, a complete software tool to support forensic anthropologists and forensic odontologists' daily work, not just DVI, but in general, trying to help on identification. So, as I said, it's a software. It's the result of more than 15 years of research. It is for sure based on, we are computer scientists, and we have been working in the artificial intelligence field, applying these techniques for the different identification techniques. Somehow we were we were a bit upset that we published a lot of papers, but nobody used them. We understand that even not used it, I think nobody know about them, because of course we were publishing in our journal, in computer science journals. So that was one of the great motivation of creating this project, was to really have an impact, to reach the experts with a tool so they can try to have extra powers for this difficult challenge. And yeah, this is the idea, is that having this software and making use of new technologies, we are aiming to somehow change the paradigm of working as an anthropologist or as an odontologist. And we give a lot of importance to images, 2D and 3D images, medical or normal photographs. And this is because it allows us to apply artificial intelligence and to automate a lot of the processes and to make automatic comparison. So we have this software, and above the software, we have different modules that support different identification techniques, craniofacial superimposition, comparative radiography, biological profile estimation, and the talk of today, dental comparison. Just briefly, an example of how this new paradigm works. We have the skeletal remains, or where we have a CT scan, or we have access to the bone in one of the different ways. For example, here you can see, well, this is a big issue in Spain. We have more than 100,000 people still in the ground. So we can scan their skulls, for example, put it into the system, ask for ante-mortem photographs to the families, and make automatic comparison and ranking as Tzipi was showing us with plus data software with dental comparison. Our idea is to make the same for all these techniques as if all of them were fingerprints. Well, the scientific bases are there, no? The scale is unique as the dental information is unique. And this is what our software does inside, no? This happened really in less than a second. It's just to show you briefly what we are doing, what our technology is doing. And of course, in the end, this is just a tool. The real decision, the real solver is the anthropologist or the odontologist, but we provide all the information and all the help to make the process faster and more objective. We started many years ago with trying to automate this technique, craniofacial superimposition, but we are for the last 5-6 years working on other techniques, facial comparison, comparative radiography, well, as I said, no? So currently our software can be already applied to facial comparison as well. We have projects, different projects for the estimation of, sorry, something is happening with my presentation. Yeah, I don't know why. This is changing from time to time. We will release a module for biological profile estimation with state-of-the-art methods to help also the anthropologists on this difficult task. And at the same time, with our collaboration with the University of Granada, we are developing completely automatic methods that can estimate the age directly from photographs, X-rays, or scans. So this is really also convenient. Makes a lot of or reduce a lot of effort and time. We also, I think it was 6-7 years ago when we start, to collaborate with Tzipi, and we went to Israel to understand how they recognize, identify people using antemortem and postmortem radiographs, and we have developed again automatic methods to compare bonds with radiographs in an automatic fashion. Yet, and these algorithms, what they does is estimate the parameters of the antemortem radiographs and reproduce it using 3D models of the bonds. And while we are working in other projects, these are still research projects. What I showed you before are new modules of the software that will be released in a few months, but we are working in these other projects. Yeah, I just wanted to show you briefly what we have done recently with the help of Tzipi, and it's basically we have a new module to compare automatically odontograms. Here you have all Tzipi Kahana's data, or well, part of it, that she could introduce the odontograms of 100 antemortem cases and the corresponding postmortem cases. Well, we can list all, for example, select one antemortem case, list all the postmortem cases in a rank of possibilities, looking at the matches possible and mismatches, and we can also see which are the teeth that match, do not match, or has a possible match. We are using here a simplified code system. Of course, other more complex codifications can be used, as Kahana was explaining. This is a much more simplified. It's just 7 codes. But just with these 7 codes, we could see that at least in this small data set is almost in all the, I think it's in 95 of these 100 cases, the first position of the rank was a positive match. Another feature that can be used in the field of dental identification As I said, we have a module for craniofacial superimposition, but when there is someone showing in a smile in the photographs, we could use this module to check how the teeth. Well, this is my photograph, and this is also my skull acquired by a CBCT scan. So once you perform the superimposition, you could see how they perfectly match. No? So this is also a really, or we think is a really useful tool for odontologists. Once you have access to this postmortem and antemortem material, no? Once you have pictures smiling and the real skull, you don't need radiographs, but at least, or you don't need, well, if you don't have radiograph, at least you can use this tool also to see how the teeth actually, the morphology of the teeth of the postmortem material or the antemortem material actually fit. And well, that was all what I wanted to show, just some brief ideas. Today the speaker is Tzipi Kahana. I just want to link her career with our experience, product, and research lines, just to let us be visible for practitioners and try to help people in the identification challenge that is massive all around the world. So thanks so much for attending, and you're ready for your questions to Tzipi or to me if were the case.